Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Chat Like a Native. We're all about helping you sound more and more like a real English speaker.
That's right.
Someone who can just hang out and chat without, overthinking every word.
Yeah, just have a natural flow.
Exactly.
And today we're gonna dive into something that's kind of a secret weapon
It is
for sounding more natural.
a secret weapon.
Phrasal verbs.
Yes, phrasal verbs. They can be a little tricky, but honestly, once you get the hang of them, they really unlock a whole new level of fluency.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's really trying to connect with native English speakers, understanding phrasal verbs, it's not just helpful. It's essential, I think.
It is.
They're everywhere in everyday conversations.
They really are. And I think what makes them so powerful is that they add this informality, this naturalness to the way you speak. It's like the difference between reading from a textbook and having a real conversation.
Exactly. And think about it. Like if you were to say search for information versus look it up, look up is so much more common.
So much more natural.
So much more natural, yeah.
Right.
Or cease trying versus give up. Give up is just so much more, just rolls off the tongue.
Way more natural.
It sounds more natural.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing, right? Phrasal verbs, they're not always easy to grasp because you've got this verb and then you add this little word, this particle, like up, down, off, on, and all of a sudden the meaning changes completely.
Right. And sometimes it's not even clear how it changes.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle sometimes.
It is. It is. It can be really tricky for learners and it's one of the things that I think makes English quite expressive, but also quite challenging.
Absolutely. Like one of my favorite examples is breakdown.
Oh, yeah.
It can mean a car stops working.
Right.
A person starts crying. Or you can even break down like a complex idea into smaller parts.
Exactly. And it's not always clear, which meaning is intended.
Right.
Until you really hear it in context.
Right. It depends on the situation.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the key with phrasal verbs, isn't it? It's all about context.
It is. Yeah. You can't just memorize a list of phrasal verbs and their definitions.
Yeah,
you can't. You have to see them in action.
Right. Because the same phrasal verb can have so many different meanings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to kind of demystify phrasal verbs a little bit.
Yeah.
Give you some strategies, some tips on how to approach them so that they don't seem so scary.
Exactly.
So overwhelming.
Yes. And really the goal is to help you start using them naturally in your own conversations.
Right. Not to just understand them, but to actually be able to use them.
Exactly. So where do we even begin with this? Like where do we even start?
Well, I think one of the best places to start is with stories.
Stories.
Yeah. I mean, our brains are wired for stories.
I love stories.
Yeah. And when you encounter a phrasal verb in the context of a story, it just makes so much more sense.
Oh.
It's not just a random verb and a preposition.
Yeah.
It's part of a narrative. It has meaning.
Okay. So instead of just memorizing turn up equals arrive,
Right.
you might hear a story about a friend who turns up at a party unexpectedly.
Exactly. And then you can picture that friend.
Yeah.
Arriving at the party.
Yeah.
You can see their face. You can hear the music. You can feel the atmosphere.
Right. And suddenly it clicks.
Exactly.
Like turn up. It's not just a word anymore.
No.
It's an experience.
Right. And another really effective technique is to use visuals.
Visuals?
Yeah, create mental images to help you remember the meaning of a phrasal verb.
Okay. So for look up, you could picture yourself literally looking up at the sky.
Exactly.
Or looking up a word in a dictionary.
Exactly. And the more vivid the image,
the
more memorable it'll be.
Okay. So stories, visuals, what else? How can we really make these phrasal verbs stick?
Well, I think the most important thing is to actually use them.
Okay.
Don't just read about them. Don't just listen to them.
Right.
Actually try to use them in your own speaking and writing.
So you're saying we should just jump in and start using them even if we're not totally confident?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Start small. Pick one or two phrasal verbs that you want to learn and just try to use them in a sentence. Maybe write a little journal entry.
I like that. A journal entry.
Yeah.
It's like a low pressure way to practice.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah. It's just about getting those words out there.
Right. The more you use them, the more natural they will become.
Okay. So we've got stories, visuals, practice. Are there any other tools that you'd recommend? Like anything that can help us kind of organize all these phrasal verbs in our brains?
Yeah. I mean, flashcards are always a good option.
Flashcards.
Yeah. You can write the phrasal verb on one side
Yeah.
and the definition on the other side.
Got it.
And you can use them to quiz yourself or to study with a friend.
Okay. That's a classic for a reason. It really works.
It does. And there are also some really great apps out there that are specifically designed for learning phrasal verbs.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And these apps can be really fun and interactive.
Okay. So flashcards, apps, and of course we can't forget about listening, right?
No, absolutely not.
Like immersing yourself in real English.
Yes. Listening to native speakers is so important
Yeah.
because it helps you to hear how phrasal verbs are used in natural conversation.
Right.
And it also helps you to get a feel for the rhythm and the intonation.
Right. Like the music of the language.
Exactly.
So we've got stories, visuals, practice, flashcards, apps, listening. It's a lot, right? But I feel like there's got to be some kind of trick to make this whole process a little easier.
Well, there is actually.
Tell me.
One really helpful strategy is to look for patterns. Yeah. So you can group phrasal verbs together based on the particle that they use.
Oh, okay.
So for example, you could have a group of phrasal verbs that all use the particle up.
Okay.
Like wake up, get up, stand up.
Great.
And by grouping them together like this, you can start to see some of the common meanings that particle has.
So it's like finding these little families of phrasal verbs.
Exactly. And once you start to see these patterns, it makes it so much easier to remember the meanings of the individual phrasal verbs.
Okay. So we're looking for patterns, we're grouping things together. But what about when we make mistakes? Because I'm sure we're going to make mistakes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's inevitable.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody learns a language without making mistakes.
Right.
And in fact, making mistakes is actually a good thing.
Okay.
Because it means that you're trying.
You're putting yourself out there.
Exactly. And you're learning from your mistakes.
Right.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace them.
Yeah. Mistakes are our friends.
They are.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot of great strategies for learning phrasal verbs, but I'm curious, what are some of the common traps that people fall into? Like, what are some of the mistakes that we should try to avoid?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes is trying to translate phrasal verbs literally.
Oh, yeah.
Word for word.
Right.
Because that often doesn't work.
Yeah, like put off.
Exactly.
If you try to translate that word for word, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. So you have to think of the phrasal verb as a unit.
As its own thing.
Yeah, as a whole.
Okay, so avoid literal translations.
Yes.
What else?
Another mistake is to overgeneralize.
Overgeneralize.
Yeah. So, for example, some people might learn that the particle up often means to increase or to finish.
Okay.
But that's not always the case.
Right.
So you can't just assume that every phrasal verb with up is going to have that meaning.
Okay. So you can't just learn one rule and apply it to every phrasal verb.
Right. You have to be careful.
Okay.
And another mistake is to not practice enough.
Oh, yeah.
You can learn all the phrasal verbs in the world, but if you don't use them, you're going to forget them.
Right. It's like anything else,
Yeah,
right?
so
You
you
got to
don't
keep
want
those muscles working.
Yeah, use it or lose it.
Exactly. So avoid literal translations, don't overgeneralize, and keep practicing.
Yes.
Okay. Those are great tips. But now I want to get into the really juicy stuff. Like, how can we use phrasal verbs to not just sound fluent, but to actually sound like a native speaker?
Well, I think one of the keys is to pay attention to the context.
The context.
Yeah. So, for example, phrasal verbs are much more common in informal speech than informal speech.
So if I'm writing a business email, I might say arrange a meeting.
Right.
But if I'm talking to a friend, I might say set up a meeting.
Exactly. And that just sounds more
Natural.
more casual,
More casual.
more like a native speaker. Yeah. And another thing to keep in mind is that there are regional differences.
Regional differences.
Yeah. So some phrasal verbs are more common in certain parts of the English-speaking world than others.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, for example, you might hear a phrasal verb in a British TV show that you wouldn't hear in an American TV show.
Okay. So it's like with any language, there are these little variations.
Exactly. And the more you expose yourself to different varieties of English, the more you'll pick up on these differences.
So listening to podcasts from different countries.
Yes.
Watching movies from different countries.
Exactly.
Okay. And what about pronunciation? Does that play a role in sounding more like a native speaker?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, okay.
Native speakers often stress certain words in a phrasal verb more than others.
Okay.
And they use a particular intonation pattern.
Right.
So by paying attention to these details, you can really refine your pronunciation and sound more natural.
So it's not just about knowing the meaning of the phrasal verb, it's about saying it the right way.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense. And I guess the last thing to remember is that language is always evolving.
It is.
Right. So new phrasal verbs are popping up all the time.
Yeah, and old phrasal verbs are taking on new meanings.
Right. So we got to stay curious.
We do.
We've got to keep learning.
Exactly. The learning never stops.
It really doesn't. Okay. So we've talked about a lot today.
We have.
But I want to make sure that our listeners walk away with some concrete steps that they can take to start improving their phrasal verb skills.
Yeah.
So what are some practical exercises that people can try?
Well, one really simple but effective exercise is to keep a journal.
A journal.
Yeah. And every day, try to use 3 new phrasal verbs in your journal entry.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be a long entry.
Right.
Just a few sentences.
Just enough to get these phrasal verbs in there.
Exactly. And another good exercise is to role play.
Role play.
Yeah. Imagine different situations where you might use phrasal verbs, like ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions.
Right.
And practice those conversations with a friend or a language partner.
So it's like acting out these little scenes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that can really help to make the phrasal verbs more memorable.
Okay. Journaling, role playing. What else?
Well, another thing you can do is to pay attention to the phrasal verbs that you hear in movies and TV shows.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
write them down.
Yeah.
Look them up in a dictionary if you need to.
Right.
And try to use them in your own conversations.
So it's like being a detective, right? You're listening for those phrasal verbs.
Exactly. And then you're adding them to your own vocabulary.
Okay. I like that. And of course, we've talked about flashcards before.
Yes.
Those are always a good tool for review.
They are. And there are also lots of online quizzes and games that you can use to practice phrasal verbs.
Perfect. So we've got a lot of options here.
We do.
But I think the most important thing is to just be patient and persistent. Right. Like learning phrasal verbs, it's a journey.
It is.
It takes time.
It does.
It takes effort. But it's so worth it.
It is. Because once you start to master phrasal verbs, you'll really start to sound more natural and more confident in your English.
Absolutely. And I think that's really the goal here, right? To help you chat like a native.
It is.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a little challenge.
Okay.
Pick one phrasal verb that you learned today and try to use it in a conversation this week.
I love that, Jeff.
Just one. Just to get started.
Yeah.
And see how it feels. See how it sounds.
Right. And I bet you'll be surprised at how much more natural and confident you sound.
I bet you will. Thanks for joining us on Chat Like a Native.
It's been fun.
And we'll see you next time.
See you later.